Who doesn't love CSS?
The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in physical conferences, in the end of the year of 2019, all the physical conferences that came after has been canceled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad, but from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, we always need to think about how to create a good situations from the bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning, we have a lot more time to spend at home. And in the first few days, I was just rearranging my apartment, move everything, change everything, and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. But then came the first weekend with the closure that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time in the weekend? But I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that I don't know why, but so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. But I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create a coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you're seeing right now is built only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using a CSS preprocessor, and even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking the My button and it's opening a pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game navigation and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on some coronavirus creature, they will be disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old code pen that was painted on canvas HTML with this cute creature that remind me a little bit Corona creatures. And I needed to think about a name for the game and how to design the main navigation. And I don't know why I had in my mind these Chicken Invaders games. I took the Invaders words and some other design ideas on how to design the main navigation. And when you are thinking about inspiration is always, but always to take all their ideas and to create from them something else, something new. And the first thing that I wanted to create is to create a coronavirus creature. And here you can see my coronavirus creature, and this was my inspiration, and it's different, and I love it. This is my coronavirus creature. And then I started to create the HTML of the coronavirus creature. First, I created a label element with the class of coronavirus, and inside I put an input type radio. And you may ask, why I'm using here label element, and why there is input type radio inside? This is part of the logic that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here with this div class body. We have the body, and inside the body we have those 12 hairs elements, and of course it's both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create all those hairs, and in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. And I didn't want to copy-paste them one by one. And I needed to think about a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using here an HTML preprocessor, which is called Pug, that gives us the possibility to do the repetition part in a lot more smarter way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using in the last 12 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, I can write it in Pug. In Pug, we have variable, while loop, and we can create HTML in a more smart and dynamically way. But when you are working with Pug, and as you can see, it's really written different from regular HTML, it's being compiled to regular HTML, but it's written different. You cannot write half code of Pug and half code of HTML. If you are working with Pug, you need to write everything in Pug, and this means that I needed to update all the HTML code to the new way that Pug is being written. And now, let's start to talk about all the fun part, all the logic of the game. First, we need to start to talk about the frames logic, because in the game we have a lot of frames. To do that, we will take a look again on the game itself. And as you can see here, this is the first game menu frame. This is the first frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. The second one is when I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up, and yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame is when I will click the UMI, it will open another pop-up the same way, but this is the third frame that we need to represent. And the last fourth frame is when I will click the Save the World button, it will hide the game menu frame, and it will open the game frame itself. And this is our last fourth frame that we need to represent in our HTML document. How I'm representing all those four frames in a very easy way, I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML elements. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first frame is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of UMI. And the last one is the pop-up of How to Play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame, and I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames in a very easy way. I'm just giving all the other frames, display none, and in this way I'm seeing only the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? If you are thinking about an input element of checkbox, checkboxes they are like flags. Unchecked, false. Checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes that every one of them is doing a different operation. For example, the first checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, show me the game menu frame, but hide me the game frame. But if it's checked, do the opposite. Show me the game frame, but hide me the game menu frame. The 2 other checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, if you are unchecked, don't show me the pop-up. And if you are checked, please show me the pop-up. The first checkbox in the same way, the checkbox that has the ID name of UMI pop-up, if you are unchecked, don't show me the UMI pop-up. And if you are checked, please show me the UMI pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document. Opacity of 0, position absolute, top minus something. You cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now, we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can I do it? To do that, the game navigation button that you saw in the game are not created from button element. Instead, I'm using your label element that only look like buttons. And label element can be targeting input with the for attribute that can be connected to a specific ID name of an input. You see this Save the World label button element is being connected with the for attribute to the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game. Toggle Game here and Toggle Game here. This is also mean that if you are clicking on this label button element, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked, and as many times that you will clicking on it. The same way for the 2 other label button elements. For example, let's take the last one, the UMI label button. If I'm clicking on it, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of UMI pop-up. This one time you will click it, it will change from unchecked to checked. If you will do it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked. But this is just changing those statuses of those checkboxes from unchecked to checked or from checked to unchecked, but it still doesn't do for us any real operation. But now we need to use the statuses of those checkboxes to show or hide other frames of the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. I'm using the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox that is in status of checked. And if I have a specific checkbox in status of checked, I can go to any sibling element with a sibling selector that come after, and I can now give it display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames of the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play label button element, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, and it will change the status from unchecked to status of checked. If this checkbox is now in status of checked, this specific selector will start to work for us. If this checkbox that has this ID name is in status of checked, please go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play. This is the real pop-up, and I'm now just giving a display block. And now this pop-up is open. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How am I closing this pop-up? And it's really the same idea when you're thinking about it. The X button and the close button, again, not button element, they are label element, they are both connected with the for attribute to the same checkbox. This is also mean that if you will click on the X button on the close label button element, it will trigger this checkbox that was in status of checked, and it will change its status again to unchecked. This selector will stop to work, and we will get the display none that we declared in the beginning, and now the pop-up will be closed. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening when I'm clicking on the Save the World button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking this play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. But how can I do two operations with one status of one checkbox? And it's really the same idea when you are thinking about it. When the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle game is being checked, first I'm going to the sibling element with the class of game menu frame, and I'm just giving it display none. And after that, I'm going to another sibling element that has the class name of game frame, and I'm just giving it display block. And in this way, I can do as many operations that I want. This way of written is, of course, written with SAS. You can write it in two separate selectors. This will be compiled to two separate selectors, but it's a lot more readable to read it and write it with SAS. Nice, but let's continue to one of the most amazing tricks that I have in this game. In the game, when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures that are being disappear and the CSS score is going up, we actually have here two separated tricks that we need to talk about them. First, how when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures that are being disappear, and how I'm printing the total score to the screen. Let's start with the first trick. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label element, and inside it has input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are here with this div class body. And inside this div, we have the eyes and the hairs. This is all the visual part of the coronavirus creature. But what I'm doing in the real game, I'm taking this label element and I'm giving it CSS animation that it will move around the screen. Because all the visual part are inside, it's taking all the visual part with it. But it's also meaning that if I'm clicking on the visual part of the coronavirus creature, it's like I'm clicking on the label element. And because there is input type radio inside the label element, it will automatically get triggered. In this case, I don't even need the for attribute and an ID name, because the input type radio is inside. Then let's recap it. I'm moving the label element that's taking all the visual part with it. You are clicking on the visual part, it's like you are clicking on the label element. This will trigger the input type radio inside, and it will change its status from status of unchecked to status of checked. This status of checked is telling us that the virus is being dead, and now we just need to hide the visual part. How I'm doing it, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked. Please go to the sibling element with the class of body and just give it opacity of 0. You see, If this input type radio will be checked, it will go to the visual part of this div with class of body, and I will just hide it with opacity of 0. In this way, you are clicking on those coronavirus creatures and they are being disappeared from the screen. And now let's continue to the second trick, how to create the score of the game. To do that, I'm using a very special CSS feature, the CSS counter feature. In order for it to work precisely, I need to define it before all the input type radio that we have in our own game. The easiest place for me to put it is on the body element. How you are declaring a CSS counter? Very easy. I just selected here the body element, and I'm using the special property of counter reset. This is creating me a CSS counter, and I'm just now need to give it a name. I gave it the name Corona. And now I need to count all those dead viruses. How I'm counting them? Every input type radio that is in status of checked, counter increment me the corona value that we declared here. And now we need to print the total score to the screen. In order for it to work precisely, we need to define it in the HTML part after all the input type radio. The easiest place is just to put it in the bottom of the HTML. Like as you can see here, I declare here div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML. And after here, I want to print the total score. To do that, I'm just selecting the class of sum with the after pseudo element, with the content property that can get the native CSS counter function that just printing me the corona value that I incremented here and created here. In this way, it's always listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, let's see a live code example for this thing. As you can see here, I kind of created 5 coronavirus creatures. This is the label that's wrapping them. This is the input type radio. You can see it here. In the real game, it has opacity of 0. And all the visual part is this div with the class of body. This is the big black circle. In the bottom, I have a place to summarize the total score. You can see here div class score, the div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, and the total value is coming from the CSS. To declare a CSS counter, I'm just selecting the body element with the property of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. For every input type radio that is in a status of checked, counter increment me the Corona value. Beside of it, if the input type radio is in status of checked, please go to the sibling element with the class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to this element and hide it with opacity of 0. And the last thing, I just need to print the total score. I'm just selecting here this class sum. As you can see here, the after pseudo element will come here, and I'm just using the property of content with the native CSS counter function that's just printing me the corona value that we incremented here and created here. And let's see that it really works. I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures. You can really see that the radio button is being checked. The CSS score is going up. And in this way, you can create a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice. But let's continue to another amazing trick. Now let's continue to the CSS countdown. How can I create a pure CSS countdown? Let's see it in a live example code. And as you can see here in the HTML, I don't have any numbers. These numbers are coming from a CSS animation that I'm doing on the content property. But the animation here is only going between 9 to 0. But this countdown is going between 99 to 0. What is actually happening here is that I'm doing animation on the before and the after pseudo element. And these both numbers that are like connected are two separated strings that they are not really connected, they are really synchronized. That you will understand exactly what is happening here, let's print here the text AA, and you will see that these both numbers are being separated. It's not one integer. There are two separated strings that are really, really synchronized. And let's reset it and let me explain you how it really works. The first value is the before pseudo element, this one. And I'm calling the animation of countdown, and I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and 1 iteration. 100 seconds and total of 10 frames. If you are thinking about it, it's meaning that every 10 seconds it will go number down. 20 seconds another one, and so on and so on. And after one iteration that is declared here, I want it to stop on the last frame of the animation of 0. To do so, I'm just using here the forwards value that telling the animation, after you have finished all of the iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. For the second value, this is the after pseudo element. I'm calling now the same animation, but in a different way. Now I'm telling the animation for the second value, yes, to work for a total of 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 second, 10 frame, every 1 second it will go number down, 2 seconds another, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration. Why? Because I declared here that I want it to work for a total of 10 iteration. And after all those 10 iterations, I want that the animation will stop again on the 0 value, on the last frame of the animation. To do so, I'm just putting here again the forwards value that telling the animation, after you are finished all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. And after 99 seconds, this will stop on the 0, 0 value, and let's see that it really works. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. Nice. Let's continue to our next thing. Random values. First, I wanted to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own game. And for that, let's look again on the game itself. If you are looking at the coronavirus creature, every one of them have randomized location. Even the scale of them is being randomized. And even the rotation of them is being randomized. But wait a minute, how can we create random stuff in CSS? You can, but you can do it with SAS. Because it's a very important example, first I want to show you this in the real code of the game. And you need to understand, if I have different locations for every one of the viruses, I needed to create 100 different animations for every one of the viruses. And of course, because I didn't want to write them one by one, in SAS, we have this special loop of for. I can run this SAS for loop 100 iteration, and to create dynamically this CSS animation. Every one of the coronavirus has 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y inside, I'm using here the SAS random function that just randomized me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I'm doing it, the SAS random function, even for the rotation. Because I don't want you to be afraid from this SAS random function, I will show you another example that is more easier to understand. Let's do it a little bit zoom, maybe even a little bit because we can. And let me show you the compile HTML that you won't be afraid from it. Just regular HTML, nothing special here. Just 6 empty li HTML elements. The values, the strings that you're seeing inside, again, are not coming from the HTML. They are coming from the CSS. And what I'm doing here, I'm using in the SAS code a SAS for loop that is running 6 iterations. As you can see here, this is a SAS variable that I'm just putting here. And this is running 6 iterations. Dynamically, this is creating me a CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. In every one of the iterations, inside the before pseudo element of this specific selector, on the content property, inside the string, I'm using the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. And all those values that you're seeing right now are randomized. For you to believe me that they are really randomized, the only thing that I need to do is to compile the SAS code again to CSS. To do so, I will just press enter when we will see that those numbers are being changed every time that I'm pressing enter. And you need to remember, browser cannot read SAS, they are reading CSS. And what is actually happening here, that this is being compiled to just regular CSS. Nothing special, just regular CSS. Nice. And let's continue to our next trick. After 99 seconds in the game, I'm putting the game over curtain, and I wanted to create the effect that the player can play with this game again and again and again. But I had a problem that I need to solve. In order to me to bring back to the game menu navigation, I need to reset the one checkbox that was checked to unchecked. To reset the CSS score of the game, I need to reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked. And I thought about a lot of ways how I can do it. But in the end, I remember that we have a really special input. And in this case, this back to main menu button is not a label element. In this case, I'm using here an input with type of reset. You can here use button type reset, input type reset, it's the same. And the only thing that I need to do now is just to wrap everything in my project with a form element, and now you are clicking on this button of input type reset. It will automatically reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. This will bring you automatically to the game menu navigation. All the radio button that was checked will now be unchecked. This will reset the CSS score to 0, and now you can play this game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask yourself, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? I need to put it exactly after 99 seconds. How can I do it? And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in this game. Everyone knows that animation have animation duration. This part, this is telling the animation after how much time it needs to be start from the beginning to the end. This is telling the amount of time of the animation. But what we are forgetting sometimes, that animation have another animation duration, the animation delay duration. And I can say this curtain that I wanted that it will start after 99 seconds, that the animation delay will be 99 seconds. And for you to believe me that it's so easy, the only thing that I need to do, let's refresh the screen, and because the animation delay here is only 5 seconds, let's count together between 1 to 5. Let me refresh the screen, and let's count together. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over! Okay, we saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create pure CSS games. And maybe you are thinking that this is the main key takeaway, but it isn't. What I want you to take from this talk is to create your own fun project in code. And why it's so important to create your own fun project in code? Because we as adults, we're starting to forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. When we are small children, we are doing it naturally. And think about it in the animal kingdom. Small kittens, they're like hunting each other, and when they're adult, they know how to hunt. But what you are doing when you are getting adult, you're starting to learn things in the boring way, in the hard way. Instead of creating your own project for fun, this way you are enjoying, having fun. You don't even notice the frustrating that sometimes you're having with code. In this way, you will be a lot better web developers. And if you are a lot better web developer, in the end, you will get a better salary. And even this is not important, because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Life are so short. Because of that, start to create everything fun from whatever you can. Before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright. Upright is an open source Firebase alternative. I'm doing a lot of fun stuff in CSS. The best place to follow me is via my Twitter account. All the other stuff you can see in my own website. The CodePen, of course, you can see in my CodePen account. And if you want the slide, take up your smartphone, the QR code here. And thank you very much.